Hello, AP US History, and today we are going to be beginning our look at period 5 of the A-Push material. That is 1844 basically to 1877, the period just after the Civil War. So, beginning with this series, we are going to be looking at the stuff that's going on around the country at the time. The sectional strife. This is the period just before the Civil War, 1850 to 1860. In this video, you're going to see some of these images like this, and if you were to look these up, you can definitely watch those videos. I don't really have a way to play them through through my videos at the moment. But if we continue, we are going to start with sectionalism. We are going to be seeing how there are all these differences between the North and the South in the years leading up to the Civil War. So the Mexican Cession, that is when we got territory from Mexico. Basically, we had gone to war with them, the Mexican-American War, and just like, okay, we're taking this territory. That is basically like New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, the area that would become those states. And that is going to tie in with the Compromise of 1850. Now, views on slavery at this time, the years before the Civil War. We have a couple of interesting things that happen. In the South, we have the Nat Turner Rebellion. This was a slave uprising that was led by a runaway slave named Nat Turner, and he led perhaps one of the most brutal slave uprisings to ever happen in American history. Him and his followers, just as one little quick tidbit about it, they actually would break into people's homes while they slept, and they would basically hack them up with hatchets and machetes and beat them with clubs and stuff like that, killing people in their sleep. Most of the victims were actually women and children, because when they were going around on their killing spree and all of that, a lot of men were actually away at a religious revival. So yeah, it was a crazy, crazy time when that was all going on. Now, the stuff that we see here with the North, that is, well, like the anti-slavery society. That was around from 1833 to 1870. This was an abolitionist society founded by William Lloyd Garrison, who was the guy who started the abolitionist newspaper called The Liberator. And they would advocate the immediate abolition of slavery. And by 1838, they actually would have more than 250,000 members in over 1,300 chapters around the country. That's a lot of people supporting getting rid of slavery. Now, the Liberty Party, this was a minor political party in the US, but the party did advocate for the abolitionist cause. They broke away from the anti-slavery society, and they advocated that the Constitution was an anti-slavery document, because there are phrases like all men are created equal, things like that. And then we have the Free Soil Party. This was a party where the main purpose was stopping the expansion of slavery into the Western territories and arguing for the rights by using phrases like free men on free soil. So the Free Soil Party was against slavery in the new territories, and they were also advocating for federal aid for internal improvements, and would urge the government, to give homesteads to settlers moving out west, to give them, property. Now, the Colonization Society, they are people who are trying to basically keep a balance between North and South with what each side wants. Not exactly a great place to be in. All right, so after the Compromise of 1850, we're going to see the establishment of popular sovereignty. This is basically the people in the territories are going to vote on what they will become, free state or slave state. All right, so taking a look here, because it's going to play in, this is where like Kansas and Nebraska are today. The people in Kansas and Nebraska, they would get the chance to vote on whether they want, when they become states, to be slave states where they can allow slavery, or free states where there is no slavery legally allowed. Right? So that, while in theory might sound good, yeah, just have the people vote, it's going to cause a lot of issues, as we will see shortly. We are going to see fugitive slave laws become more strict after the Compromise of 1850, and we're also going to get a little book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. We will be talking about that at a later date, but just know that it's during this time period where there's all this political and sectional tension in the country that this book comes out. Now, we see something here called the end of the Great Triumvirate. This is referencing a triumvirate, or an alliance, between three statesmen in American politics, and these three men dominated politics at this time for a lot of the first half of the 1800s. This is referencing Henry Clay from Kentucky, Daniel Webster from Massachusetts, and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. They are the guys who have been writing the vast majority of all these compromises between the North and the South, between pro-slavery and anti-slavery. They've been trying their best to keep the country together despite it wanting to split itself apart. Now, with the 1852, and they basically are going to break apart, and it's like the tensions have just gotten too high, and there's really not much more that these men can do to hold the country together. Now, we are also going to see a split in the Whig Party, which is a political party that replaced the Federalists. Now, the Whigs, they're going to collapse because of the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which is coming up soon in our discussion today, with most of the northern members of the party joining the anti-slavery Republican Party when it is founded in 1854. And then the Southern Whigs are going to join the Nativist American Party and also the Constitutional Union Party, which are parties that are basically trying to work with keeping things going reasonably well. But of course, it's not going to work because we get to talk about the Civil War. All right, so let us keep going. The Kansas-Nebraska Act. This is why I brought up them as examples before. Now, the Kansas-Nebraska Act is going to basically get rid of the Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise, if you remember, established a line that follows here from like the southeastern tip of Virginia, following along the southern border, going all the way through to the Pacific. But the compromise was that Missouri would be the only state north of that line that is a slave state, and otherwise you have to be below that line to become a future slave state, and anything above would be a free state. But through the Compromise of 1850, and especially the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, we're going to see that popular sovereignty is going to be what we want to happen. And that's not really going to work out to our benefit. This picture right here sums it up pretty well. You guys know what this means. Put a Mentos in the soda, it's going to fizz up and explode all over the place. That is what happens to the country. All right. So the Compromise of 1850, meaning like stuff with popular sovereignty, is our Mentos, and sectionalism, the peaceful but tense divide between the different regions in the country, it's now going to fizz up and blow up all over the place. 1854 is also when we're going to see the birth of the Republican Party, which of course is also when we're going to see the introduction of Abraham Lincoln into national politics, because he is one of those early Republicans. Now, This right here, Bleeding Kansas, this is a direct result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, because we're going to see what popular sovereignty, people getting to vote on whether they're going to be free or slave states, is going to do. Now, Bleeding Kansas was a sequence of violent events involving abolitionists and pro-slavery elements, people that took place in the Kansas Territory, where a lot of pro-slavery and anti-slavery constitutions were competing to be the constitution of the state of Kansas. The dispute would basically erupt into violence. Think of it as like a large-scale gang war, where you've got people raiding from Nebraska down into Kansas and attacking people. Like at one point, a town was actually getting bombarded with a cannon. And this incident, where quite a few people died from all the fighting, would basically further strain the relations between the North and the South, and basically was a precursor to the Civil War actually getting started. Some people would actually argue this was the beginning of the Civil War. Now, at the bottom here, we see caning of Charles Sumner. That is referencing the caning of Charles Sumner on May 22nd, 1856. What happened is Preston Brooks, who was a U.S. House of Representatives, a representative from South Carolina, he walks into the Senate with his cane in hand, and he starts beating Charles Sumner, who is a senator from Massachusetts, like over the head with it, as you can see in the illustration, until he was unconscious. This was the first type of violence shown about sectionalism, especially on the floor of the Capitol building, where we have the members of the government in an all-out like fight, where one guy's trying to kill another. Now, Brooks' violent act was in response to a speech that Sumner had given, where he attacked the institution of slavery and pro-slavery congressmen. So this is in open retaliation for their differences over the belief in slavery. So things are just getting crazy, right? Now, the Dred Scott case, this one is also pretty crazy. So Dred Scott is this gentleman right here. He was a slave. His master moved into a territory with it and brought him with them. That was a free territory. Slaves did not exist there. But what happened was he and his master got into a disagreement over the fact of him remaining a slave, even though they were in a free territory. So he took his master to court, and what it did was he argued the fact hey, I'm a slave, but I was taken to a place where slavery is not allowed, therefore I should be free. But what happened was the Supreme Court, because it went all the way to the Supreme Court, declared that slaves are property, they are not citizens, therefore they have no legal rights, and because they are property, the owner of said property can take them wherever they wish, basically nullifying the Missouri Compromise, saying that slaves were not to be north of this boundary line. So it basically sets back the abolitionist movement by 20 years. So yeah, that's a pretty messed up one right there, if I do say so myself. All right, so 1858. Abraham Lincoln he becomes nationally known during this year. And it is dealing with the idea of popular sovereignty, because we're going to see these Lincoln-Douglas debates where he is debating against another, he's running for a government seat in the Congress, and he's debating against another congressman. So this is a series of 7 debates where 2 of them argued the important issue of the day, which was like popular sovereignty, the Lecompton Constitution, Dred Scott decision. Douglas won the debates, but Lincoln's position in these debates helped him beat Douglas in the 1860 presidential election because he became well known and people liked his anti-slavery beliefs, where he wanted to contain slavery and eventually have it die out. So, and a lot of people liked that up north, which is where the vast majority of his political support was from. All right. Now we see here the Freeport Doctrine. This was Stephen Douglas's doctrine that, in spite of how the Dred Scott decision went, slavery could be excluded from the territories of the United States by local legislation. So he's trying to find some loopholes there that would work like in one way or another, that the territories have a little more say in what happens there than like, the Missouri Compromise boundary line. Here's an interesting one. This one I kind of like talking about. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. This happened in 1859. And the story is, well, John Brown kind of started making a name for himself in the Bleeding Kansas crisis, where he's an abolitionist and he would have been fighting against the pro-slavery people who were trying to influence the vote on which state constitution Kansas would be getting. So what John Brown does is he's going to raid Harper's Ferry in an effort to basically get a slave revolt going. And he's going to raid the military arsenal in Harper's Ferry. It's a stockpile of guns and ammunition. And yeah, he kind of thought of it as a dress rehearsal or a prelude to the Civil War. It was like getting it all going. Now, he raided the armory with 22 people, but they were defeated over the course of 2 days. And they're defeated by a company of U.S. Marines led by Israel Green, who's an officer during the Civil War. And several of the people present at the raid, like fighting against John Brown and his followers, will later become heavily involved in the Civil War, including Colonel Robert E. Lee, who was actually in command of the operation leading the Marines to take Harper's Ferry back from Brown and his raiders. Stonewall Jackson and Jeb Stuart, two very, very important Confederate commanders during the Civil War, were actually part of the troops who were tasked with guarding John Brown when he was captured and arrested at the end of the fight in Harper's Ferry to retake the armory. Now, including John Brown, we have 22 raiders. 15 of them were white, 7 of them were black. 10 people were killed during the raid. 7 were tried and executed, including John Brown. He was hung. And 5 people that managed to escape the fight. So yeah, that is a pretty crazy story. If you look up any photographs of John Brown, you ever hear the phrase that someone's got crazy eyes? Yeah, that's John Brown. He had some crazy eyes. Now, here's something that you can watch on your own time about John Brown. It's pretty entertaining, if I do say so myself, as well as this video right here that's talking about compromises, the compromises and their influence on the Civil War. If you like the Stephen Colbert show, I would recommend like watching that because it's pretty funny. But in conclusion, during the 1850 to 1860 time period, we're going to see a heavy intensifying of the divisions between the different areas of the country, between the North, the South, the West. The debates over slavery, economy, the culture of the country are all coming into question and leading us further and further towards civil war. So yeah, it's getting crazy, right? And it's only going to get crazier the further we go down into this period of the AP material, getting through the Civil War into Reconstruction, everything that comes afterward. All right, this is where we're going to end today. Be sure to come back next time when we will continue our build up to the outbreak of the American Civil War. See you next time.